Welcome to Sleepy Classic Tales. Today we take you into a story of hope, betrayal, and patience, into our calmly narrated short version of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas and Auguste Maquet, first published in 1846. It is the year 1815, and the harbor of Marseille is alive with activity. Ships come and go, seagulls circle above the water. Voices blend with the creaking of the ropes. Among all the men aboard a newly arrived vessel, one stands out in particular. Edmond Dantes. Edmond is young, calm, and well-liked. The crew respects him. His captain trusts him. On this day, he is not only returning from a successful sea voyage, he is also on the verge of being promoted. And more than that, he plans to marry his fiancée, Mercedes, who has been waiting for his return for weeks. For Edmond, life seems orderly, almost perfect. He believes in justice, in loyalty, in simple happiness. He does not suspect that this very innocence makes him vulnerable. For not everyone rejoices in his happiness. Fernand, a man who secretly desires Mercedes, sees in Edmond his greatest rival. Danglars, a resentful colleague, envies his professional advancement. Neither openly reveals his thoughts. They allow them to grow in secrecy. One night, intoxicated by envy and frustration, they form a fateful plan. They write an anonymous letter accusing Edmond of treason. It claims that he is a political conspirator, an enemy of the state. The accusation is fabricated, yet it is dangerous. On the day of his engagement, in the midst of joy, Edmond is arrested. Without explanation, without the opportunity to defend himself, he is taken away. Mercedes remains stunned. The guests fall silent. Happiness shatters within a few moments. Edmond does not understand what is happening. He trusts that everything will be cleared up. But the wheels of power turn differently. An ambitious young prosecutor takes over the case. He quickly realizes that Edmond is innocent, but he also recognizes that the truth could damage his own career. So he makes a decision that will change Edmond's life forever. Edmond Dantes is taken away without trial, to a place from which hardly anyone returns, to the fortress of Château d'If. And as the ship leaves the harbor, nothing remains of Edmond's former life but a name and a hope that slowly begins to fade. The crossing to the fortress of Château d'If does not take long, yet for Edmond it feels endless. The sea lies calm, almost indifferent to his fate. He stands on deck, bound, guarded, and still does not understand how a happy morning could turn into a nightmare. The fortress rises bare and forbidding from the water. Thick walls, narrow windows, no sign of life. As Edmond is brought ashore, he feels real fear for the first time. Not panic, but the dull sense that something here is final. He is led into a cell, cold, damp, barely any light. The door closes with a heavy sound that burns itself into his memory. Edmond waits. For questions, for explanations, for justice. But nothing happens. Days pass, perhaps weeks. Time loses its meaning. Edmond clings to one thought. It must be a misunderstanding. Sooner or later, someone will come, listen to him, release him. He writes petitions, pleads, argues. No one answers. Slowly, his hope begins to crumble. Loneliness becomes the greatest torment. No conversation, no sound except the dripping of water and the footsteps of the guards. Edmond begins to speak aloud to himself, just to hear his own voice. He thinks of Mercedes, of her smile, of the life that had been waiting for him. And then the doubts come. Why was he betrayed? Who could have benefited? The questions gnaw at him, circling endlessly. With each day, not only despair grows, but also a new feeling. Anger. Still quiet, still unformed, but present. Years pass. At some point, Edmund stops counting them. His body grows thinner, his gaze harder. The young, trusting man slowly disappears. In his place emerges someone who observes, thinks, waits. One day he hears a sound that does not belong to the usual routine, a scratching, a dull scraping behind the wall. At first, Edmund believes it to be an illusion, a trick of his weakened mind. But the sound returns, day after day, night after night. Someone is digging. And for the first time in a long while, something stirs within Edmund that he had almost forgotten. Curiosity and hope. The scratching behind the wall no longer lets Edmund go. At first, he hardly dares to hope. Too often his mind has deceived him already. Too often he has clung to illusions. But this sound is different. It follows a rhythm. It has direction. And it does not stop. Edmund begins to dig as well. With his bare hands at first, later with a loose stone he frees from the wall. Every movement is exhausting, every minute a risk. Yet the thought of no longer being alone gives him a strength he believed long lost. After weeks of hard, secret work, the wall finally gives way. Before him lies a narrow tunnel, and at the other end, a man. He is old, emaciated, his face marked by years of imprisonment, but his eyes are alert, clear, full of intelligence. He calls himself Abbé Faria. He too has been a prisoner for many years and dug the tunnel in order to escape. The two men begin to speak, at first cautiously, then more openly. For Edmund, it is as if he were learning to breathe again after a long time. Abbé Faria is educated, sharp-minded, patient. He asks questions, precise, penetrating ones. Edmund tells him his story, about the voyage, about Mercedes, about the arrest, about the anonymous letter, about the prosecutor who had him imprisoned. As Edmund speaks, Faria listens attentively, and then he begins to put the events into order. Slowly, step by step, he shows Edmund what truly happened. That the letter was no coincidence, that envy and jealousy were behind it. That Edmund became the victim of a deliberate intrigue. For the first time, Edmund clearly sees the faces of his betrayers. Danglars, Fernand, and others who benefited while he was forgotten. This realization strikes him harder than the imprisonment itself. It was not the prison that was the worst, but the betrayal. Abbé Faria becomes for Edmund a teacher, a father figure, a mental anchor. He teaches him daily languages, sciences, history, philosophy. Edmund learns faster, more intensely than ever before. His mind, long confined, unfolds with tremendous force. From the naive sailor emerges a thinking man. And then Faria reveals another secret to him. He tells him of a legendary treasure, hidden on the island of Monte Cristo. A fortune so vast it can change entire lives. Faria knows the place. He has deciphered the clues, but he also knows he will never reach the island. Edmund listens and understands. Patience is power. Knowledge is power. And time can be a tool. In the darkness of the cell, something new begins to grow. Not hope, but determination. The time in the fortress of Château d'If changes Edmund fundamentally. The days that once passed empty and meaningless now gain structure. Every visit from Abbe Faria, every conversation, every lesson gives his existence direction again. Edmund does not only learn facts and knowledge, he learns to think, to question, to plan. Abbe Faria sharpens his mind, but also his view of the world. He shows him how power works, how people act when driven by fear, ambition, or greed. And Edmund realizes that his story is not an isolated case. Faria himself is a victim of political intrigue. He too was silenced because he knew too much. In this realization lies a bitter truth for Edmund. Justice is not a fixed principle. It is negotiable. With each passing year, Edmund grows calmer, harder. His anger has not disappeared, but it has changed. It is no longer uncontrolled, but gathered, disciplined, waiting. Abbe Faria, on the other hand, grows weaker. His body slowly gives in. On some days he loses himself in thoughts, speaks incoherently, suffers from seizures. Edmund cares for him as best he can. The roles have shifted. From student, he has become protector. One night, Faria is struck by a severe attack. Edmund knows this could be the end. In a clear moment, the old man calls him to his side and repeats the clues to the treasure of Monte Cristo. He names markers, signs, sequences. Edmund memorizes every word. Then, Abbe Faria dies. With his death, Edmund loses the only person who had been close to him all these years. But Faria's last thought was not for himself, but for Edmund's future. And that is exactly where Edmund begins. When the guards come to collect the body, Edmund makes a decision, a desperate but well-considered plan. He exchanges his clothes with those of the dead man and lies motionless in the sack meant for Abbe Faria. Hours later, he is carried out of the cell, without ceremony, without a name, without dignity. The sack is brought aboard a boat. In the night, it is opened and thrown into the sea. For the world, Edmond Dantès is dead. But in the dark water, as he struggles against bonds and cold, his new life begins. The sea is cold, dark, and endless. Edmund fights his way out of the sack, gasps for air, and swims as long as his strength allows. Every breath hurts, every muscle burns. But he is not swimming only for his life, he is swimming toward freedom. At last, exhausted, he reaches the shore of a small island. There, he collapses. When he regains consciousness, he realizes that he has survived. For the first time in many years, no bars stand between him and the sky. That same day, Edmund encounters smugglers who use the island as a waypoint. At first, they mistrust him, but Edmund adapts. He speaks calmly, thoughtfully, shows no weakness. When they test him, he proves himself. He has learned to read people and to master himself. The smugglers take him along. In the months that follow, Edmund lives among them. He learns their roots, their dealings, their way of thinking. No one asks questions. No one cares about his past. And that is exactly what he needs. He is no longer the prisoner, not yet the Count. He is something in between, a man without a name. When the opportunity arises, he separates from the group and continues alone. His goal is clear: the island of Monte Cristo. There, hidden between rocks and earth, Edmund finds the treasure of which Abbe Faria had spoken. Chests filled with gold, gemstones, riches beyond imagination. But Edmund does not cheer. He does not laugh. He does not even count. he thinks. The treasure is not a gift. It is a tool. With this fortune, Edmond can become anything. And that is exactly what he plans. He disappears from the world for several years, travels through countries and cities, learns languages fluently, studies societies, power structures, human weaknesses. He observes and gathers information. He learns what has become of his betrayers. Danglars is wealthy, Fernand is respected. Each of them has built a life upon Edmond's downfall, and none of them suspects that the man they once destroyed is still alive. When Edmond finally returns, no one recognizes him. He bears a new name, a new title, a new identity. He is now the Count of Monte Cristo. And he has time. The Count of Monte Cristo enters society like a stranger from another world. Wealthy, educated, mysterious. No one knows his exact origin, and that is precisely what makes him interesting. He appears polite, reserved, attentive. He listens more than he speaks and remembers every detail. He begins to hear old names again. Danglars, Fernand. Men who are now respected, prosperous, secure. For them, Edmond Dantès is long forgotten, an insignificant name from the past. The Count observes them from a distance, studies their weaknesses, their habits, their dependencies. His revenge is not impulsive. It is precise. He helps where help is expected. He opens doors, enables business, grants access to money and influence. People begin to trust him, not out of friendship, but out of advantage. That is exactly what he counted on. At the same time, he follows old traces. He learns what has become of Mercedes. She has married, out of necessity, out of loss, out of the belief that Edmond was dead. This realization strikes him harder than he expected. For a moment, his carefully constructed plan falters, but he forces himself to remain calm. The Count allows himself no weakness. Feelings are dangerous. They make one unpredictable. Instead, he transforms pain into determination. Every thought of the past sharpens his resolve not to deviate. Slowly, the first cracks in the lives of his enemies become visible. Financial dependencies, unsecured alliances, secrets that have remained hidden too long. The Count does not have to force them. He only has to bring them to light. A word at the right time, a hint to the right person, an offer one cannot refuse. Meanwhile, Edmond Dantès remains dead. No one recognizes him behind the mask of the Count, and in that lies his greatest power. He can act without being seen himself. He is at once part of society and its silent observer. Yet however controlled his actions are, something within him begins to change. The revenge that carried him for so long no longer fills everything. Between planning and execution, a new question emerges, quiet but persistent. What remains when everything is done? For now, he suppresses the thought. The plan is not yet complete. The accounts are unsettled. And the Count of Monte Cristo has not come to hesitate. He has come to finish. The Count of Monte Cristo watches as the fates of his enemies unfold. Not in a single blow, but step by step. Decisions they themselves once made catch up with them. Contracts break. Trust collapses. Certainties shift. The Count is never at the center. He is the catalyst, not the executioner. Danglars loses everything on which he built his life, his wealth, his position, his security. Fernand is confronted with his past, with guilt that can no longer remain hidden. The masks fall, and with them, the lives founded on lies. Yet as the plan reaches its conclusion, Edmund realizes that fulfillment tastes different from what he had imagined. The satisfaction is fleeting. The anger that sustained him for so long loses its strength. What remains is emptiness and a new clarity. He recognizes that he is no longer the man who was once innocently arrested in Marseille, but he is no longer only the avenger he made himself into. The years of imprisonment, the knowledge, the patience, the wealth, all of it has changed him, irrevocably. In a quiet moment, he allows himself to look back, to Mercedes, to the life that might have been his. He understands that not everything can be reclaimed. Some losses become part of one's own story, no matter how great the power one attains. The Count begins to let go, not out of weakness, but out of insight. He helps where help still has meaning. He intervenes where the innocent are affected, not to retaliate, but to restore balance. In the end, one realization remains with him, heavier than gold or revenge: that patience and suffering can shape a person, but that forgiveness toward oneself is the most difficult step. Edmond Dantes disappears from the world as quietly as he once returned to it, not as a victim, not as an avenger, but as someone who has learned that justice without measure destroys, and that hope remains only where it is not forced. And with that, our story for today comes to an end. A story about betrayal, patience, and the question of whether justice truly begins where revenge ends. Perhaps you are now wondering, how different is this calm, short version from the original novel with all its subplots and intrigues? Why does Edmond Dantes, despite his power and freedom, never return to the woman he once loved? And what does his story say about guilt, retribution, and human limits, then as now? We explore these and other questions in our accompanying book, Golden Pages, Volume 2. There we place the story in context, illuminate its background, and show what Alexandre Dumas truly wanted to tell with this character. You will find the link in the description. For today, you may simply let the story resonate. Let your thoughts slowly come to rest. And if you like, we will listen together again tomorrow. Good night.